so much disinformation is spreading because of the motherless story at the moment. And the CNN story about the Rape Academy, and it's getting a little bit tiring to see all the misinformed posts on social media that go by. Now, one thing that does one form of the misunderstanding that's really getting to me at this point is, I keep hearing stats like people are coming forward and being like, 62 million men visited a website where that teaches men to rape women, and I'm like, wait, that's not the same story that I read, at CNN. Like, I realized that the way the CNN story was written needed obviously to be much more careful because we live in a nation of people that just have the worst reading comprehension skills imaginable. So it's hard to it's difficult to really emphasize just how badly so many people who are reacting to the story are interpreting things and wildly off the actual report from CNN. The stat that we have about Motherless, that is all the visitors to the site, over 90% of which are not part of the sleep rape community. That doesn't matter if it's got 62 million visits or 80 million in March, because the overwhelming majority of the site's users had nothing to do with this story and are not rapists. They just like porn. And this is what grills me about all of this. The site itself is responsible, unfortunately, for policing and moderating itself, and unfortunately it has allowed a group of miscreants to slip past its defenses and post a bunch of illegal content to the site. But the site is huge. It hosts a whole broad diversity of erotica, which means that just because you visited the site doesn't mean you're watching women get raped in their sleep on the site. There are a huge number of people who probably visited that website who are having a rude awakening about what's going on under their watch and are not happy about it, are disgusted by it. So, these numbers that we're getting, I mean, like, they try to quibble with us about how, well, it could be one guy that visited the site over and over and over and over again. We don't even need to go there, really, ultimately, because the way that this was reported as if every fucking one of the people's visits was watching those videos, when the reality couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, the amount of, internet illiteracy, wildly inaccurate misunderstandings of the story and everything is just getting to be astonishing at this point, and I hate to be a pedant, but, the fact of the matter is that some of us went and pointed out that, at first, as we were starting to understand the story, that it could be one person visiting the site over and over and over again, because an IP address doesn't really tell you much. But even that, I believe, is now woefully insufficient to the gross amount of underestimation that's the gross conflation and inflation of that, number. That is 62 million visits to the entire website. The whole thing, where the vast majority of the videos on the website have nothing to do with rape and are fully consensual, legal erotica, that have nothing to do with this. A bunch of criminals grafted themselves onto motherless infrastructure and are abusing the system. I mean, they're going into Motherless's comment section, for instance, and linking people to the Telegram channels that they all communicate in, and the creepy Telegram communities that they're all part of. This is the accurate understanding of the story. Like, you're all getting it wrong. The site hosts millions of videos, and it's all erotica, most of which is fully legal, fully consensual content. Which means that just because you got lumped into that 62 million number or that 80 million visitor in March number does not mean that you were watching the eye check rape content from the CNN story. That means that pretty much only the tiniest fraction of a percentage of the site's users were involved with this. Because the vast majority of them were going to content that had nothing to do with this story. I don't know why some people want to believe the worst version of events and this story. It doesn't make sense to me. Like, why? The only thing that I can think of is that you've got a vested interest in wanting to believe in misandry. You want to believe the worst of men. You know, and that's what's going on here. You know, just because somebody happens to like porn doesn't mean they like to watch women get raped on camera. That's just not, you know, an accurate depiction of it. And so, you know, the way the journalist reported this story, unfortunately, seems to almost have been deliberately engineered to create this kind of confusion. The fact of the matter is that people were going into the comment section on the website, linking their Telegram channels, you know, as a means to contact each other and to organize to commit these crimes. Motherless.com didn't do enough to crack down on it. Perhaps that is a valid criticism. But to go out and to say that, you know, Motherless.com and all was responsible for teaching men how to rape is not the truth. The truth of the matter is people were using Motherless's infrastructure to direct each other to Telegram channels where they taught each other how to rape off of Motherless's infrastructure and not at all the responsibility of the website. You know, and this is what is so frustrating is, you know, the way that people, like, I thought you were internet users. I thought you would understand this, but unfortunately, you know, apparently it's like first day internet kid shit takes that are being spread all over cyberspace about this one. Yeah. You know, it's so frustrating and everything. You know, Motherless.com may have like 80 million visitors, but because they cater to a broad diversity of sexualized interest, that means that the overwhelming likelihood is that almost all of those visits were not to the iCheck videos. You know, it's probably like, 100,000 people maybe at most that are watching it, you know, and yet here we are, you know, reporting giant stats like 62 million and everything, and we're also saying that Motherless.com teaches people how to rape. This is not the truth. You clearly didn't understand the story.